This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for January 23rd, 2018, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey, checkers.
And producer Pat.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to explore rates of vegetarianism, and maybe even a little veganism in there. Oh. Adam is going to look into plastic bags versus reusable bags.
That's right.
But first, what would happen if you never took out your contact lenses? Christina, tell us.
Have you guys ever worn contact lenses? Any of you?
Not me.
Once or twice. I used to wear glasses. I never really wore contacts. I tried them once or twice, and then I got laser eye surgery.
I have glasses that's very recent, and I've never worn a contact lens. My wife wears them.
All right. So you guys may remember this story. It made the rounds a few months ago after it was published in the British Medical Journal. And I think you'd remember because it likely made you shudder when you heard it. The story goes, after a 67-year-old UK woman went in for routine cataract surgery, doctors found 27 disposable contact lenses embedded under her upper eyelid.
Oh, no, I did not know this. Ew!
So like they kept rolling up and they just stayed there?
Unbeknownst to her, yes. Okay, now, anyone listening who wears contact lenses knows it can be very uncomfortable if a contact slips and gets stuck under your eyelid, which is what makes this story so crazy to me. The author of the paper, Rupal Mourjaria, said when the anesthetist put a speculum to the woman's eye to hold it open for anesthetic, he found a blue mass under her eyelid that turned out to be a clump of 17 disposable contact lenses that were, quote, bound together by mucus.
So disposable means like one use for one day or like used for a month?
Dailies, yeah.
Daily.
Exactly.
It means you dispose of them in your eye. They just eventually dissolve. If you wait long enough, after you die, they dissolve.
Maybe if they were biodegradable.
There's 2-week disposable, so you wear them for 2 weeks and then you get rid of them. But then there's most people, or a lot of people, wear dailies because they're just convenient.
But even 2-week disposables, you take them out each day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
After further examination, they found 10 more. A clinical spokesman for the American Academy of Ophthalmology, Dr. Thomas Steinman, said he's seen patients with a stuck lens before, but never 27. Apparently, this woman wore disposable contacts for 35 years and told her shock doctors that when she couldn't find and remove a lens, she assumed it had worked its way out. Now, Mourjaria said her team wanted to publish a report about the case to raise awareness of why you should get regular eye exams. Now, I had to get glasses a few years ago after I started suffering from trombone syndrome. Pat, do you want to explain trombone syndrome?
Well, actually, that's pretty well remembered. So I think that comes from a segment that I did years ago where I talked about whether or not starting to wear glasses would weaken your eyes. And it turns out that it's just part of the natural aging process. But we asked a friend of ours who is an optometrist, and she referred to it as trombone syndrome. Basically, it's this invisible trombone that you're playing with the menu or the book that you're reading.
Yeah.
You need to get it further away
Move
from
it
your face.
farther and closer and farther and closer until you can try to read it. Because my glasses are multifocal, mostly for reading, I didn't think I was a candidate for contacts until I heard multifocal contacts were a thing. So I'm very new to contacts. I've worn them maybe 15, 20 times. I only wear them out to shows or other work functions, and I use my glasses when I'm working on a computer. Now, one of the first things you learn or should learn when getting contacts is that it's impossible for a contact to slide back behind your eye thanks to a membrane called the conjunctiva. This membrane goes across the white of the eye under the eyelid, creates a pouch all the way around. So if your contact gets trapped in there, it's not going anywhere. But it sure as hell can cause you a ton of grief. So a couple of days ago, I had a little situation. I wore my contact lenses way longer than I should have or was used to because I had to wear them to the eye docs early Friday morning for an assessment. So about 14 hours or so later...
And 5 or 6 glasses of wine later.
Yeah, well, it was poker night. 5 or 6, a couple. When I was getting ready for bed, I couldn't get the right one out, and it kept making my eye more irritated trying. So this put me in panic mode, which of course didn't make things any better. And after some talking down, I finally went to bed, and I showed up at my doc's office the next morning for assistance. The lens had come out at some point, but I had irritated my eye so much it was swollen and felt like something was scratching my eyeball. So she gave me eye drops. Pat bought me my favorite ice cream. I laid low, and by Sunday night, I was pretty much back to normal.
So your contact lens did get out without you realizing it? Or do you mean it just got out?
At some point when I was doing the recommended protocol that I read up on the internet, it had come out. After this happened, I was reminded that I bookmarked an article from Dig.com a few months back to cover on the show. Dig has a column called What Would Happen If. They look at hypothetical situations each week and they take them to their logical endpoint. So it's stuff like what would happen if you never showered again? So it's stuff that's kind of ridiculous, but it's really interesting because they talk to experts in various fields. So that week's topic was of interest because I had just started trying contacts. And that week it was what would happen if you never removed your contact lenses. Now, I know some people fall asleep with their contacts in or stretch daily contact wear without any significant repercussions. But in order to understand the potential long-term effects of leaving contacts in, Dig spoke to Dr. Jason Jedlicka, a clinical associate professor at Indiana University's School of Optometry. Now, first, a little 101 on how our eyes work. Our eyes are covered and lubricated by a tear film comprised of 3 layers. A lipid layer, which is a top layer of oil that keeps your eyes from drying out. An aqueous layer, which is, as it sounds, a watery layer that keeps the eye moisturized. And then a mucus layer, which works like an anchor to hold the tear film to the eye. Now, our bodies naturally refresh this layer, but wearing disposable contacts complicates this process. Our corneas need oxygen, and the longer you wear a contact, the less oxygen your eye gets. Says Dr. Jedlicka, basically, if you never took your contact lenses out, they would get coated in proteins, oils, mucus, and so on. That is in your natural tear layer. These molecules would stick to the lens and cause a film to form over the lens. Okay, so once that film starts, you really are opening up a potential world of trouble. First up, swelling, a natural human body reaction when something is awry. Your eyes become light sensitive, they get really red and painful. The film could also cause an allergic reaction under your eyelids, which causes redness and itchiness. But more seriously is the possibility of contracting an infection. Says Jedlicka, bacteria might colonize in the film and cause an infection which could range from mild to blinding. I read a couple of scary accounts from people who developed infections, warning other wearers to please heed advice to not leave contacts in longer than suggested. So the weird and fascinating thing is that everyone's reactions can really vary. Jedlicka writes, it is amazing at the range of reactions to leaving a lens in. Some individuals can experience these kind of reactions in a matter of just a few days. Others can seemingly leave lenses in for weeks and not have these reactions occur. I say don't take any chances because, I mean, what are your eyes worth to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Cristina. I did find that utterly disturbing because one of the reasons I didn't wear contacts is the idea of sticking something in my eye was unpleasant. And one of the 2 times that I did wear them, I was in a very easy got into a panic mode of either getting it in my eye and then when it was in, making sure I could get it out. I had to consciously tell myself look, it's not going to be in there forever. Just calm down and get this out of your eye.
What if the world ends while it's in my eye?
Right.
You know?
Alternatively, well, whatever. We'll just keep putting more in. Maybe he thought she'd get super sight. Because if you add extra contacts, you can just focus your eyes better and get eagle eyes, maybe?
I think double contacts would make your vision roughly as bad as it originally was, only on the different end of the scale.
What do you know? 8 eyes?
That makes
16
sense.
eyes, 32 eyes, 64 eyes.
Given your discomfort, Darren, I'm surprised that you got laser eye surgery because it sounds like it's quite an invasive procedure.
Excellent question, Pat. And I had the exact same concern. When they do the measuring your cornea to see if it's valid, they put in numbing drops, and then there's no startle response.
Yeah.
There's no reaction where you want to shy away or close your eye. I'm like, oh, okay. With numbing drops, you can actually poke your eye and it doesn't matter. And they did that.
Idea.
And but they did that before the surgery as well, which was more just unpleasant and interesting.
Okay.
To see through less of your own eye made the world seem closer but more blurry. Part of me's like, wow, I'm seeing things as they really are. I'm like, that's nonsense. But you feel closer to the world because you're seeing through less of your own.
It's like you're astral projecting by like 2 millimeters.
Yes, or perhaps half a millimeter. Several months ago, I heard in an interview that the rates of veganism in the United States had held steady at 2% for the past 30 years. And like everything in my life, I wondered if this was true. This is why I have no friends. I'll mainly be exploring the numbers for Canada, but I think they're useful generalizable lessons. The first key point. I think that there's a fundamental uncertainty about the rates of food styles, consumption, because most of the data comes from surveys, and people often don't provide accurate answers. It could be because they don't know, because they forget, because they believe themselves better than they are, and or because they want to impress the person taking the survey, even if it's anonymous. Also, when I do find an article that has some numbers, that article sometimes says something good about Dr. Oz or the film What the Health, which makes me downgrade my trust in
No
those
kidding.
numbers. Tricky thing to research. Yeah. Here's a 2015 headline from the Vancouver Humane Society that highlights some of the complications. Almost 12 million Canadians now vegetarian or trying to eat less meat! Exclamation point. Mm-hmm. What a nice exclamation point.
12 million?
12 million. Those who pay attention to words will notice that or phrase in there. Others might wonder what the population of Canada is to give the numbers more meaning. Mm-hmm. Canada had almost 36 million people in 2015, which is just a bit less than California. But that or means what? Yeah. Here's a quote. That figure includes 8% who identify as vegetarian or mostly vegetarian, as well as 25% who state that they are trying to eat less meat. First, mostly vegetarian probably means eating some meat. Second, stating you're trying to eat less meat is good, but it is uncertain if those people actually do eat less meat. Yeah. I wonder if 82, say 100% of Canadians would also say that they are trying to eat more vegetables or exercise more.
Most people are trying to eat less food.
Exactly.
In general, you know?
A different stat I saw said 93% of Americans say they're trying to eat more vegetables. Well, good for them.
Yeah. Statistics stay, you're filling. Yeah.
Yes, or they're eating more vegetables along with everything else. From a publication over 10 years ago, quote, it is the position of the American Dietetic Association and Dietitians of Canada that appropriately planned vegetarian diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Approximately 2.5% of adults in the United States and 4% of adults in Canada follow vegetarian diets. A vegetarian diet is defined as one that does not include meat, fish, or fowl. So this is useful. They're saying it's a good diet, that's fine. They give you some numbers, and they give you the definition of the words that they used in theory to get those numbers.
Absolutely.
A study published in 2005 looking at iodine deficiency said that, quote, findings indicate that strict vegetarians and vegans probably comprise less than 0.1% of the U.S. population.
Wow.
A bit less than 2.5%.
That's not even close.
And there's a nice list, as usual, on Wikipedia of vegetarianism by country, and they have, well, about 60 countries, say, and different rates and percentages. And some countries, like India, are very, very high, and other ones, like Canada, United States, it's like 12%, 13%, 14%. But then the body of the article, the numbers there don't quite agree with the list that's at the top of the article, and most of them are from surveys. So this paper that I just mentioned did a lot of research into surveys, and it shows the numbers range quite widely. How people respond and follow-ups indicate if they are eating meat or not. Mm-hmm. The authors think one of the main issues is there isn't a universally agreed upon definition of vegetarian. Quote, such seemingly inconsistent survey results are likely due to a lack of universally accepted definition of vegetarian, rather than lack of understanding or intelligence. Support for that view is found in a survey of U.S. women physicians, a population characterized both by intelligence and knowledge of biology and nutrition. This is White et al., 1999. When survey subjects were asked about their diets, about 8% identified themselves as vegetarians. When asked to describe their actual food intake, nearly half of the vegetarian physicians admitted to eating meat, poultry, or fish during the prior week.
Wow.
Right, so I'm a vegetarian, and yeah, I had meat yesterday. Anything more recent? Well, here's a headline. A new 2017 report confirms a 6% increase in the vegan population. And it references a report that another website has this headline. Quote, 6% of Americans now identify as vegan. Why this is a huge deal for the planet. Those aren't the same thing. No. The first site took the current rate of 1% and described the new rate of 6% as a 6% increase. Okay?
Like 6% of the 1% or from 1% to 7%? There's a big difference there.
Agreed. It doesn't make sense either way, actually.
Yes.
Another site, quote, veganism in the United States grows by 600% since 2014. That's obviously much closer to the truth, because to go from 1% to 6%, that's an increase.
Yes.
If you're keeping population numbers relatively constant.
Yeah.
Perhaps people are actually vegan, or did it suddenly become cooler to identify as vegan in the past 3 years? Maybe. Hal Herzog had a great piece in Psychology Today from 2011. He wrote the book Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat, Why It's So Hard to Think Straight About Animals, which I read and remember liking. He was exploring the supposed rate of vegetarianism and our psychology around eating animals. Quote, "The reason for the widespread but mistaken belief that America is rapidly going vegetarian is the mismatch between what people say they eat and what they actually eat. Take a 2002 Time CNN poll on the eating habits of 10,000 Americans. 6% of the individuals surveyed said they considered themselves vegetarian. When asked by the pollsters what they had eaten in the last 24 hours, 60% of the self-described vegetarians admitted that they have consumed red meat, poultry, or fish the previous day."
On purpose? Or like, I don't know.
Well, I had some vegetables with the chicken. So, these are older numbers, but aligns well with the U.S. women physicians I mentioned earlier, although that was from 1999 as well. Of general concern, meat consumption has increased even if more people are vegetarian, which may or may not be the case. Yeah. This is from Herzog. Quote, "In 1975, the average American ate 178 pounds of red meat and poultry. By 2007, the number had jumped to 222 pounds. Wow. And while the number of cattle killed for our dining pleasure has decreased by nearly 20% since 1975, the number of chickens killed in American slaughterhouses has jumped 200%. Now, this is just general notions of how the meat is being increased in terms of consumption. It's hard to know of who's eating it and in what way, right? You could imagine more people are eating meat, but there still are more vegans and vegetarians, right? Because of different distributions.
I think people are just eating more food.
Well, that's true too. I mention that because rates of vegetarianism can't help but be a proxy for thinking about how much meat is consumed. When people hear about this, they immediately probably think people are eating more or less animals in general. Now, it's not necessarily the case, and if you point it out, they'd realize that. But if someone says, oh, there's a lot more vegetarians around, and there's even more meat being consumed, okay, it's just a nuance that I think should be elaborated upon. In summary, I have no idea how many Canadians or Americans are vegetarian or vegan. Assuming those words mean not eating animals or foods derived from animal products. We know people want to identify as those things, but it seems far fewer are. If pressed, I'd guess definitely less than 5% vegetarian, probably less than 3% for either country, and veganism below 1%. Now that's a guess. I show this to someone who's very prominent and knowledgeable in the vegan community. He's like, what are you basing those numbers on? I'm like, I don't know, they're a guess. He's like, well, that's fine, but you should probably then elaborate on why you're guessing them. And it really is just everything I read and I put together and I spat it out. This is not a hard and fast number. Sure. Now, he said, based on his expertise, it's probably less than 4% for any of it and probably less than 1% for anything more restrictive. Yeah. These numbers aren't great given how many animals suffer in factory farms. Many of us know this and love our cats and dogs, but continue to have no problem eating factory farm meat. I'll end by quoting Herzog. I regard ethical vegetarians and especially vegans as moral heroes. Unlike most of us, they take ethical issues seriously. And I agree. Now, that said, if we're waiting for everyone to become vegan and vegetarian, say including me, that wait is going to keep going and we're not going to make enough change. So I think the culture has to shift entirely. And then people just happen to follow what they're used to or what their friends do.
Or cheap synthetic hamburger.
Cheap synthetic hamburger, it becomes inappropriate. The meat has been more expensive and it's less viable. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting because I talked to various people in the world and they're like, oh, veganism is on the rise. Or even that interview that I mentioned at the very beginning when it said it's held steady at 2% for 3 decades. Those were people who are very knowledgeable about veganism and animal welfare and synthetic meat and such. And I couldn't find that stat anywhere.
Yeah.
I've had friends try the Impossible Burger when they were in New York City and they just raved about it. That if they had that burger available, that they wouldn't need to turn to real meat because it was that deceptive and that yummy.
I had it in San Francisco.
Oh, and
I thought I probably should have just had it gone to McDonald's and donated the difference of the money.
That's funny.
Because the Impossible Burger was like $20.
Well, the price is always going to be an issue, right?
So if it was like $2 to $3, then you're like, this is fine. It does taste a lot like a hamburger. Now, a lot of people, myself included probably, don't actually enjoy pure hamburger meat. You add 7 other things to make it taste good, which is maybe an indication you don't really like the taste of meat in the first place.
But make me a synthetic steak and I would eat that.
Sure, exactly. So I'm supportive of it, and these things usually cost more at the beginning, but so many people are raving about it. I'm like, this is really expensive.
Yeah. And I think that's always going to be a problem. I think the fact that people are willing to pay a little extra for organic or non-GMO or whatever, even though those things are nonsense mostly, show that people are willing to pay a small premium for something that's a little more ethical, but I don't think people are willing to pay 10 times. for example.
I mean, we buy free-range eggs as kind of a rule. If they were 10 times more expensive than non-free-range eggs, would we still buy them? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I have managed to reduce like dairy intake, amount of eggs, meat in general in my life over the past couple of years. And I really think that's the best approach. Just have less. Yeah. Whether it's meatless Mondays or just one meal that has less meat per week, whatever it is, just try to make some small reduction and then just try to increase it. Well, all right, with that segment in the bag, I do wonder what I should have used to carry it. Reusable bags, Adam? What's best?
Last week, an article made the rounds in the media in Quebec talking about how many times one had to reuse a reusable bag to make up for the equivalent number of plastic grocery bags. These numbers varied by type of bag, with some seemingly needing to be used nearly 1,000 times before the negative effects were offset by using plastic single-use bags. I wanted to get a real feel for what exactly these numbers were and share this information with English-speaking listeners who might not have been privy to this particular article. Now, the original article I saw was something that Pat sent my way via the Journal de Montréal. I know there was quite a similar article in La Presse, which my wife reads, and this kind of story seems to have appeared in publications throughout Quebec. Why did this only make the rounds in Quebec? Well, aside from there being slightly more than the usual lazy effort needed for English people to copy and paste articles from site to site without doing their own research, the research itself was done by Recyc Québec. Now, Recyc Québec is a Société d'État, which means it's kind of like a crown corporation. It's fully owned and controlled by the state. These kind of things are common for energy, transportation companies, which are government-owned and operated, or TV and radio companies like things like the CBC. Now, their purpose is to be a reference for waste and residue management in Quebec. They're all about reduce, reuse, recycle, and that kind of stuff, and to inform people to have a more evidence-based approach, which I think is safe to say is the kind of thing that we are, at least in principle, supportive of here on the show. Now, I wanted to go straight to the source to get some context for what all these articles were talking about. Some of the terms used in the articles weren't very specific. For my taste, they were referencing the equivalent impact on human health, qualities of the ecosystem, the use of fossil fuels, and the impact when discarded. Now, I wanted to get a very clear idea of what these were actually measuring before I looked at what those numbers are. Otherwise, well, what are you saying, 700 this? What's the metric here? The report was prepared by CIRAIG, the Centre International de Référence sur le cycle de vie des produits, procédés et services, which is basically the International Reference Center on the life cycle of products, processes, and services. Now, I'm going to just be translating some of this myself, so, if something's not perfectly translated, I apologize. Now, there was a 100-page report and a 4-page fact sheet. Let's just say I read the fact sheet in its entirety, and I might have just skimmed the report a little. The point of the study was to evaluate the potential costs and environmental impact of different types of shopping bags. This isn't intended for consumers, but rather to inform municipalities when they're considering banning plastic bags and making sure that they have all the facts before they make those decisions. So, no surprise, not all bags are created equal. Even for disposable bags, there are big differences. Conventional plastic bags, that's your standard type of grocery bag. There's also OXO biodegradable plastic bags, compostable bioplastics, and thicker plastics, stuff you might get at a bookstore or something like that. And of course, paper bags, paper or plastic. For reusable bags, there are weaved polypropylene, non-weaved polypropylene, cotton, and something called a Credo bag, which seems to be a brand name for a certain type of recycled reusable bag made in Montreal. Let's look at these different categories that are cited and see what they actually mean. I had to dig into the 100-page report to find exactly what they were measuring. So, when it comes to human health, this attempts to measure the ultimate impact on human health. That includes toxic effects such as cancer-causing effects, impact on respiration, climate change, radiation, impact to water supplies, and the ozone layer. So, any impact that this product may have and how it eventually affects us. The metric that they used is disability-adjusted life years. Now, I'm not going to use those numbers, but they basically use these numbers for the comparison. There's also quality of the ecosystem, the impact on aquatic and terrestrial life. Basically, a lot of the same impacts that cause down the line impact on human health would also affect plant and animal life, health of the oceans, water supplies, and such. The metric is number of extinct species in a given surface area over a given amount of time per kilogram of the substance. There's also use of fossil fuels, which sounds kind of straightforward. This is the use of fossil fuels that's needed to make the product. This can be in raw materials, but also for energy of production, the energy needed for transportation, things like that. Now, these three metrics will invariably be linked. Fossil fuel usage has an impact on the ecosystem, which affects animals, plant, and human life. So you'll generally see these numbers correlating a bit with each other. And then there's impact when discarded, which measures the impact when a bag is thrown away as litter. So if you just don't put this in the garbage or the recycling, you just throw it away. This measures the impact to the ecosystem, such as the impact by animals eating the bag, as well as visual pollution from seeing the bag. And the metric is kilograms by years, with some products lasting from 100 to 1,000 years, and others a few months. So there's a huge difference here. Now, for disposable bags, the conventional thin ones actually fared better than the alternatives in a lot of metrics, those being human health, quality of the ecosystem, and fossil fuels. They're thin and light, meaning they require a lot less in the way of raw materials to make. They're easy to make, very cheap. The downside being that if they're abandoned in the environment, they're the worst, an estimate of 500 years, and that's the 100 to 1,000 years range for how long they'll be sitting around on the side of the road or in a forest or whatever.
Let's just appreciate when Columbus, quote-unquote, discovered America and the time that happened compared to where we are now.
It's like, here's the bag Columbus threw away. Wow, that'd be cool.
Robots in the future be like, damn, humans left these bags around, and no one left to blame.
That's why we'll create simulations of them and torture them. Mm-hmm. Biodegradable bags have the main advantage of breaking down in such a case. Thicker plastic bags can be reused more often, but they would need to be used 3 to 6 times to have the same impact as a traditional bag. So they have a bar graph with values for single-use bags and lengthy report. Basically, when it comes to most metrics, the alternatives to thin plastic are worse because more goes into making them. When it comes to paper or plastic, the answer is clear: plastic. A paper bag has to be reused 20 to 28 times for an equivalent impact to human health, 17 to 24 times for an equivalent impact to the ecosystem, and it uses 4 to 6 times the fossil fuel resources to make one. Paper bags aren't easy to reuse. If you plan on tossing it on the side of the road, though, it's significantly better. It'll just break down. It'll be fine. I mean, you shouldn't just throw it on the side of the road, but when you're comparing it to a bag that could be there up to 1,000 years, it's night and day.
Is there a reason you couldn't just burn the paper? Because it's bad for particulate matter versus burning plastic, which is obviously much worse.
This would be terrible. But yeah, there's a lot of ways you could dispose of it. You just recycle it. Now, when it comes to reusable bags, most of the bags were somewhat comparable to look at the graph visually, with cotton bags being magnitudes worse in pretty much all metrics except the impact when discarded, because they break down fairly quickly. This is what a lot of the articles highlighted. They say, like, some plastic bags are kind of bad. Look at this type. Terrible. Huge numbers. So now that we have a reference for some of these terms, I'll throw out some numbers that you may have heard from the articles, but you actually have some reference for what they would actually mean. There's a range, and these account for discrepancies in them being compared to small or large plastic bags. I'd also like to throw out some numbers for reference so you get an idea of how often you'd have to really reuse a bag. If you have a reusable bag, which you use to get groceries once a week, you'll use it 52 times a year, or 104 times in 2 years. So when you're talking about numbers up to 100 uses, that's kind of how much you'd have to be reusing something. Human health, talking about down the road impact to people. A weaved polypropylene bag needs to be reused 73 to 98 times to have the same impact as a cheap plastic bag. A non-weaved polypropylene bag needs to be reused 35 to 59 times, a little better there. And a cotton bag needs to be reused 2,954 to 3,657 times. That's probably not going to happen. You would have to reuse a cotton bag once a week for 70 years to offset.
Or once a day for, what were those numbers again?
Or once a day for 10 years.
6 to 10 years? Okay.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the equivalent impact on the ecosystem, a weaved polypropylene bag would need to be used 46 to 61 times, a non-weaved polypropylene bag 22 to 37 times, and a cotton bag 702 to 870 times. So not quite as many as the other example, but still quite a few. Now, when it comes to fossil fuels, a non-weaved polypropylene bag would need to be reused 16 to 21 times. A non-weaved polypropylene bag would need to be reused 11 to 18 times. A cotton bag would need to be reused 100 to 124 times. And these are reasonable compared to some of the other metrics for cotton bags. Now, for lingering in the environment, the numbers for the weaved and non-weaved polypropylene were actually close to a single-use plastic bag. So you discard one of these big, thick, heavy bags, and it's roughly as bad as throwing away a single sort of discardable plastic bag. So those are really bad to just litter with. Don't do it. Cotton bags are much better. They're in the range of paper. They'll break down because it's made out of stuff that just breaks down in nature. Now, Pat, you mentioned people reusing some of these bags when we talked about this before the show. And this is mentioned in the report. It seems that 77.7% of these cheap plastic bags actually see a second use, such as being used as a garbage bag, a lunch bag, or for carrying around your dog excrement. Now, in Ireland, there was a tax that was placed on disposable plastic bags, which resulted in a significant reduction in plastic bags in circulation, and that resulted in a rise in the sale of garbage bags. So there's going to be some unintended consequences. Is that going to really offset the savings you have? It's probably not going to be that bad because it's not like people are going to be buying thousands of garbage bags.
That was the thing that frustrated me most because Ontario, they did the same thing. Perhaps you're going to mention that, 5% tax on getting a plastic bag. Like, well, what are people going to throw out their garbage in?
Yeah.
Their hands?
Yeah.
No, they're going to buy a bag, or I'll just I'll charge me for the bag because then I can use it for garbage later.
So what is it here? Is it 5 cents a bag?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. In Quebec, usually the grocery stores will charge you 5 cents a bag. Now, ultimately, the best option is just not to take a bag. It's not always convenient, like at the grocery store, but if you're buying a small number of things, sometimes it works.
In the words of Mitch Hedberg, who bought 6 apples, the clerk said, "Would you like a bag?" "No, I'd juggle."
Juggling 6, that's impressive. So even if you're bagging your groceries, you can avoid using more bags just by, for example, not requiring meat to be packaged separately, or to hand carry certain larger items like a jug or something, a big pack of toilet paper. Be creative. Sometimes you can save a bag or two like that, and it's not bad. Also worth considering as a consumer is that the plastic bag waste may be minimal next to what else you might be getting. As we've seen that the plastic bags really aren't this huge impact. Prepackaged goods will have a variable amount of cardboard, plastic, and styrofoam. While it isn't always easy to tell which choice might be the best, a good starting point is that the less actual volume and weight to the packaging, the better. So I'm not talking about the food inside, but the actual packaging itself. So if you care about the environment, be wary of your bag choice. Use a polypropylene bag if you'd like a reusable bag, but try to use it many times to get the most out of it. Don't fret too much about using a light and thin disposable bag, but if you do, try to give it a second use and absolutely never litter with it. These bags will take 100 to 1,000 years to break down in the environment, meaning they will likely be around until someone else gets around to cleaning it up after you. Avoid thicker bags if possible, as stores giving those out will often be places where you'll buy enough that you can just carry those items away in your hands. If you do end up getting a more sturdy plastic bag, try to use it a handful of times to make up for the modest impact associated with their production. And if you don't care about the planet and want to maximize your negative impact, then use reusable cotton bags once and discard them appropriately, all the while leaving traditional plastic bags in the forest near wildlife.
It's good prescriptions for excellence there right at the end, Adam. If you really care about the environment, be a breatharian, but don't breathe out too much carbon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or you could do what producer Pat does. Mm-hmm. You're a good guardian of the environment, Pat, because you always use your knapsack for groceries.
Right. So, but a knapsack is still something that you eventually have to throw away.
Yeah.
But I would say that my knapsack, I get thousands of grocery.
Right. And is it correct that you own this knapsack for non-grocery related reasons? You're just using it for that, like me?
Yeah.
That's it exactly.
Right.
Yeah, like if you're so sometimes I'll be shopping with the baby and I'll have the stroller. Well, you can just put the things under the stroller. Like there are things that you're going to have anyway, and that's a great example of that. But if you were to buy a bag for the sole purpose of doing your groceries and you actually crunch the numbers of that, you might find that it's not doing many favors.
Right. Or a lot of places just hand you that now. Or someone comes over and they bring some food to some event you have and they just leave you with this bag.
Yeah.
The durable bag. You're like, well, I have another one of these now.
Yeah.
I love this kind of segment because it's one of those things where, people always make assumptions that, well, plastic bags are bad for the environment. It's not that simple. It's not that simple.
Everything has a series of trade-offs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we should always strive to sort of maximize it, and it's not always good bad, it's what's the best.
And I'll up it even more. So say someone gets a reusable bag because they think it's what's best, which it may or may not be. And because they're doing that, they feel good. And they might be less likely then to do something which is more important, like reducing the overall carbon emissions. Because overall, I think climate change as a whole is a much bigger issue than landfill. The Earth is really big. This is not an encouragement to pollute. There's certain things that are more important than others, and we got to triage.
Yeah, if you're using a really terrible reusable bag, but you like bike to the grocery store instead of taking your SUV, you're probably coming out on top big time.
I was trying to hint at don't examine one or two actions in isolation.
Yeah.
Like, I bought lots of, very expensive to create food, very calorically dense food that it required all these resources, but I used the right bag.
Yeah. Buy vegetables instead of meat. That's better for the planet too, right? There's a lot of other issues.
So I think the theme of this show is it's almost impossible to do the right thing.
Don't leave your contact in your iPad.
It's almost impossible to do the right thing, but it's easy to do a small thing that might be better.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you can't do something better than the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Cristina showed us that you probably shouldn't leave your contact in your eye. Lest you have swelling, other irritants, and or possibly go blind eventually. I explored rates of vegetarianism and veganism, which are very hard to come by. You'd actually have to find some world where people are willing to have every piece of food they eat monitored for a certain amount of time, and then deduce for that time only what they are. But I'd say the rates are probably 1 to 5%. And then Adam explored reusable bags versus other types of bags, and it seems like there's all a series of trade-offs. Choose wisely. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
Good night, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Thanks.
Slight percent that something could happen to my eyes, so.
Well, yeah, everyone has a different risk profile.
What if they gave you $1.3 million?
I knew that
For
was going to
eye
come
surgery?
back.
Okay, I would get laser eye surgery if someone gave me $1 million.
But no one's going to understand that because the other part's going to be cut out.
I know. Adam's like, let me do a call back to a non-existent joke.